The masquerade ball hummed with the soft melody of violins, and the rustle of silk whispered through the air as guests swirled beneath lanterns hanging from the branches of ancient trees. The warm ethereal glow bathed the gardens in light, casting a dreamy ambience over the Petalora festival. Seraphim, adorned in shimmering silver, stood at the edges of the grand pavilion, her heart racing beneath her calm exterior. This was no ordinary evening. The person she was matched with going to be in attendance, and she would finally meet her betrothed. Her mother, Jolinia, had insisted she attend. "There are people you need to meet," she said, her words laced with something deeper, something Seraphim couldn't quite place. As she scanned the masked faces around her, her fingers traced the delicate silver embroidery on her own mask. Her breath caught, not from the beauty of the scene, but from the weight of the expectation pressing down on her. Jolinia was suddenly at her side, poised and elegant. Her dress deep emerald and her mask had a deep emerald accent with peacock feathers. "There you are," she said softly. "You look radiant, my dear." Seraphim gave a small smile, her eyes still drifting across the sea of masks. "As do you, mother. I am feeling some apprehension. This person I am to meet, have they arrived yet?" Jolinia's lips curved into a knowing smile, her eyes twinkling with secret knowledge. "Indeed, I believe you'll find him captivating." Jolinia slipped her arm through Seraphim's and began to guide her through the crowd. Seraphim's heart raced faster. She knew who she was about to meet, even if his face would remain hidden from now. This was the man the elders had chosen for her, her betrothed. She had so many things she wanted to ask her mother about the man she was going to meet. But the speed at which Jolinia was moving, especially with the fray of joviality, made her silent. The air was thick with laughter and chatter. The masked figures swirled round them in a dance of mystery and elegance. It wasn't until they reached the fountain at the far side of the pavilion that Jolinia stopped, her eyes twinkling as they settled on a figure standing alone, half hidden by the shadows of the trees. "Seraphim?" Jolinia whispered, the tone in her voice shifting slightly to excitement. "This is a man I think you'll want to speak with." The man stepped forward, his face a mix of emotions. Even under his mask, which was deep onyx trimmed in gold, his eyes glittered with emotions that were tumultuous. His height was taller than Leander by almost a head, and his authority radiated with his stance. His hands were clasped in front of him, and his knuckles were white with apprehension. "Good evening," he greeted, his voice deep and resonant. To Seraphim it sounded familiar. As he extended his hands to hers, the feel of his clasp also felt similar to a hand helping her up some time ago. "Good evening," she replied as she released his hand. She was hesitant to look upward. When she finally did look into his eyes, they were deep brown, crinkling in mirth. "You seem familiar," she mused aloud, her curiosity piqued. His lips tugged upward into a faint smile. "I would hope so," he said. "We've danced around each other at many gatherings, though I doubt we've been formally introduced." Seraphim raised an eyebrow, intrigued but cautious. "Is that so?" She tilted her head slightly, trying to get a better read on him. "You'll forgive me if I don't remember. With our most recent collision, I'm certain that it did affect your memory, but that is not a bad thing, as now I have the ability to make a fresh impression," he assured her, his tone oddly playful, a stark contrast to the mystery surrounding him. Seraphim studied him for a moment, her pulse quickening slightly at his words. There was a freedom in the anonymity, she realized, a chance to be something or someone other than the roles they were constantly expected to play. "I suppose that's true," she agreed, allowing herself to smile up at him. "Here is your opportunity to impress me." Would you care to dance with a stranger? He took her hand in his and brought it to his mouth with a smirk and a brush of her knuckles with his lips, and her heart fluttered. I am hopefully by the end of the night we will be strangers no longer. Jolenia cleared her throat softly, reminding them both of her presence. Amusement reigned in her gaze as she observed the shift between them. I'll leave you two to get better acquainted. Seraphim, do remember to save a dance for me later. And with that, she slipped back into the crowd, leaving Seraphim alone with her mysterious companion. So, Seraphim began after a deep groan of realization, since my mother has given you a leg up on the mystery that I was going to keep this evening, are you going to tell me your name now, or is this all part of the game? He chuckled lightly, the sound low and smooth. I prefer the mystery, for names have power, and mine would change your perspective. So let me keep it for the time being. She couldn't help but smile despite herself. They do indeed, but it's hardly fair that I'm the only one standing here without it. He inclined his head. Fair enough, but humor me. Seraphim, is it? Let's enjoy this moment without the weight of titles or names, just for tonight. Without another word, he extended his arm to her, a silent invitation to join the dance. She hesitated only for a second, taking it, the warmth of his touch sending a shiver up her spine. They stepped onto the dance floor, the soft strains of the orchestra surrounding them as they moved in sync, as though they had done this 100 times before. Seraphim felt herself relax, falling into the rhythm of the music, her earlier reservation slipping away. For the first time that night, she felt truly free. And we are back. Whew. Something's wrong with my eyes. There we go. Gotta love when you're... There we go. If it's not one thing, it's another. Alright. Back to story time. As Seraphim twirled across the dance floor, her thoughts kept drifting back to the man before her. His movements were fluid and confident, as though he had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. Every step he took matched hers perfectly, guiding her with an ease that made it feel as if they were alone in the world. The rest of the masquerade fading into a blur of music and lights. There was something about him, something that felt both familiar and foreign at once. His hands were warm and firm, yet his touch remained gentle, careful not to rove aimlessly. Though the mask obscured his features, even without seeing his face, Seraphim could sense the depth in his gaze. Those dark, intense eyes held secrets she yearned to uncover. She tried to read him, to decipher the emotions behind the mask, but every glance, every slight movement only deepened the mystery. His dancing was smooth and supple as he moved with grace. His movements were agile and consistent with a reflection of her exact abilities as they whirled around and the rest of the group faded. She knew exactly who she was, as if this dance had been written in the stars long before either of them had arrived at the Petalora masquerade ball. Was it possible he had been watching her long before tonight? The thought crossed her mind more than once. How could a stranger make her feel like they had danced together countless times before? Her mother had been insistent that she attend, that she meet someone important. And here she was, spinning in the arms of a man who seemed to have unraveled part of the riddle of her life. The anonymity of the masquerade was supposed to keep things simple. Seraphim felt as though she was walking through a labyrinth of secrets, and somehow the stranger knew the way out. Their dance was a language all its own, a silent conversation amid the laughter and music. His hands pressed lightly against her lower back, guiding her with a precision that was unnerving to her. The air around them hot with unspoken tension, an electric charge that Seraphim could neither explain nor ignore. She was unnerved because it was exciting. The only other time she felt this way was sparring with Leander. And yet here she was, her heart thrumming in her ears, acutely aware that she wanted those hands to do something more than stay at her lower back. The music swelled, and all at once she was in a deep dip with the climax of the song, his hand under her neck, one at her waist. Her breathing had quickened to a harsh rasp as she was brought back upright. She was also laughing from being caught off guard in such a way. Seraphim, the man spoke against her ear with an almost low growl, but it wasn't frightening. She loved the sound of her name on his lips and the feel of it at her throat. She pulled herself closer to him, better nestling herself into an embrace. Your beauty is matched only by your agility. I'm grateful to see you're able to relax into my arms. His earlier promise had been kept. They were strangers no longer. She hadn't been certain that this person had already known her before her mother revealed her name. But she was certain now. She knew exactly who was standing before her was indeed the man she would marry. Elders or not, she felt a connection that was the same as her mother had spoken of with her father. For now she chose to savor the mystery, allowing herself to be swept away by the enchanting glow of the lanterns and the rhythm of the violins. She had spent too many nights under the weight of duty, bound by the expectations of the garden and the elders. Tonight, for just a little while, she wanted to forget all that, to lose herself, to let the masquerade be what it was meant to be, an escape. And for a fleeting moment, it was just that, a beautiful, beguiling escape. As Seraphim glided across the dance floor, her thoughts were drawn to the man before her. Every step felt like part of a well-rehearsed play, as though they had shared this dance countless times before. His movements were confident, guiding her with a grace that seemed both familiar and foreign. I think we ran into a repeated... No. Okay, never mind. Well, yes, but... He moves... Okay. He moved as if he knew precisely who she was, as if they shared a history unknown to her, yet hidden behind the facade of the masquerade. And though she was here to meet her betrothed, chosen by the elders and her mother, the stranger's presence had captivated her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Tonight, at the Petalora masquerade, she wanted nothing more than to escape the weight of expectations. She longed to lose herself in the anonymity of the evening, to let go of her role as a dutiful daughter of the celestial garden and savor this fleeting sense of freedom. With each graceful spin, the ballroom's soft glow and the lifting violin music transported her further from reality, allowing her to exist purely in the moment, here in the embrace of this mysterious man. Seraphim felt free. But her reverie was abruptly shattered by an unexpected commotion. A sharp clang echoed through the hall, silencing the violins and turning every head. Seraphim's pulse quickened as murmurs of confusion rippled through the crowd. She craned her neck to see a shadowed figure darting between the guests, cloaked in dark, tattered robes that seemed out of place among the lavishly dressed guests. The figure was moving with the desperation that cut through the elegance of the night, their hurried steps scattering tables and spilling drinks in their wake. Whispers broke out, spreading quickly through the ballroom. A member of the fallen, someone gasped, the name tinged with both awe and fear. The fallen, rebels from Emberly, those who had abandoned the celestial garden and defied the elder's authority. In the sanctity of the garden, tales of the fallen were often twisted into fearful myths. They were painted as dangerous, uncontrollable, and ruthless, yet the hint of freedom in their defiance made them an alluring mystery. The figure's flight through the hall seemed almost surreal. The very notion of a fallen crashing the ball was unthinkable, and yet there they were, moving with practiced agility as angel guards, clad in heavy armor, rushed in pursuit. Their weapons clinked loudly as they advanced, ordering the guests to clear a path. Panic spread, and guests scattered in all directions, creating a corridor of chaos through which the fallen darted. Seraphim instinctively gripped her partner's arm, her heart hammering as she watched the figure dodge the guards with expert agility, weaving through the startled crowd. The guards struggled to keep up, weighed down by their armor and hindered by the gathering throng of guests. Just as the fallen passed by her, Seraphim's gaze locked with theirs, a brief but intense moment of connection. Beneath the figure's mask, she glimpsed a flicker of emotion, a mix of desperation and defiance that left her breathless. Before she could fully process the sight, another disturbance erupted from the far end of the ballroom. A second figure, dressed similarly but concealed in the crowd, revealed several small fur-covered creatures from a hidden cage. The creatures, kerfuffles, infamous for their oversized eyes, sharp teeth, and a nerving tendency to hiss, scattered in all directions, their shrill cries punctuating the confusion. Seraphim's blood ran cold. She had always feared kerfuffles, their beady eyes and eerie screeches triggering a visceral dread. Now as they scurried between the guests, clawing at hems and nibbling on stray shoes, her fear twisted into full-blown terror. She tried to back away, her feet fumbling as she struggled to distance herself from the creatures. One of the kerfuffles darted near her foot, its glassy eyes fixed on her, and she stifled a scream, pressing herself closer to her mysterious partner. The ballroom descended into pandemonium. Guests shrieked as the kerfuffles tore through the gathering, leaping onto tables, knocking over drinks. The once elegant affair had become a scene of barely contained chaos, the gilded illusion of order shattered by the presence of the fallen and their furry accomplices. The angel guards, distracted by the rampaging kerfuffles, faltered. Their pursuit of the first intruder slowed as they tried to fend off the feral creatures lunging at their legs. In the confusion, the second fallen, who had blended seamlessly into the crowd, moved to assist the fleeing figure. This one had remained incognito until now, waiting for the perfect moment to act. Slipping through the throng, they deftly intercepted an angel guard's swing, deflecting it with a well-timed parry that sent the guard stumbling. With a nod to the other fallen, they signaled the direction of the exit. The first fallen took the cue, vaulting over a nearby table and bolting toward the grand pavilion's doors. The two exchanged A brief glance, a wordless acknowledgement of their shared mission. As the kerfuffles continued their chaotic distraction, the second fallen turned to face the guards, creating a defensive shield that allowed the first fallen to precious seconds to reach the pavilion's edge. Then a roar echoed from above. All eyes turned skyward as the ground trembled beneath them. The shadow of massive wings blotted out the lantern's light, casting a dark veil over the ballroom. A dragon descended, its scales gleaming in the soft glow, reflecting the firelight in brilliant iridescent hues. With a practiced leap, the first fallen seized the dragon's lowered saddle. And in a heartbeat, they were airborne, the dragon's powerful wings carrying them into the night. But the guards weren't done. Arrows flew, their silver tips glinting in the lantern light as they arced toward the fleeing dragon. The second fallen, still in the ballroom, dashed forward to intercept their swift movements, knocking down tables and upending chairs to block the guards' lines of sight. With one last flourish, they turned and dashed toward the edge of the ballroom. Before the guards could regain their footing, the dragon wheeled back, swooping low to collect the second fallen. They reached out, grasping the offered hand, and pulled themselves onto the dragon's back in one swift motion. The dragon surged upward, its wings slicing through the air as it ascended, carrying its riders beyond the garden walls and into the night. For a long moment, the ballroom remained frozen, everyone staring into the sky where the dragon had disappeared. The violins lay abandoned, their music silenced, and the lanterns flickered softly, casting long shadows over the still stunned guests. Seraphim's breath came in shallow gasps as she tried to process the chaos that had unfolded before her. The fallen had risked everything to be here tonight. But for what purpose? What message had they sought to send to the garden and its elders? By crashing the celestial garden's most esteemed celebration. Her gaze shifted to her partner, who had watched the entire event with an unsettling calm. Unlike the other guests, he seemed unfazed by the pandemonium, as though he had anticipated every moment. He took her hand gently, steadying her trembling form as he held her gaze. A subtle, knowing glimmer flickered in his eyes, and that made Seraphim's heart pound anew. The next morning, Seraphim bounded down the stairs, dressed for another day of training. She paused at the kitchen table, noticing an unfamiliar letter beside her usual plate of eggs and fruit. The flowing script marked it as an official correspondence from the arborists. Seraphim Hightower, report to the Mother Tree for training, the Celestial Arborists. With a quick, grateful nod to the letter, she scarfed down her breakfast and dashed outside. As she neared the edges of the main garden, she slowed, savoring the tranquil morning. The soft rustling of leaves, bird songs echoing through the trees, and vibrant colors of the flowers filled her senses. Stopping at a grand weeping willow, she placed a hand on its trunk, inhaling deeply, allowing herself to be grounded by its age and grace. Seraphim. A low whisper drifted past her. She blinked and glanced around, but saw only a squirrel nibbling on an acorn, eyeing her curiously from a nearby oak. Shaking her head, she continued to the mother tree, putting aside the odd feeling that something or someone had called her name. At the entrance, Leander awaited her, his tall frame casting a shadow from the doorway. "Sarah, I see you got the message." He held the door open, grinning. The inside of the mother tree glowed softly, with lights that traced their ways up the walls, shimmering as they ascended. Each of her steps left a faint, momentary glow in her wake. "Seraphim," a voice echoed behind her. "Yes, Leander?" She turned, smiling, but he looked just as puzzled. "I didn't say anything," he replied, arching a brow. "But come on, today's training is different." He led her deeper into the tree than she had ever gone through winding corridors and staircases that spiraled far below. Finally, they reached a pair of intricately decorated double doors. Seraphim reached out to touch the glasswork depicting the mother tree, vibrant in color and teeming with life. Leander gestured toward the etching. "As above, so below." It's a reminder of balance. Before she could ask him to explain, he pushed the doors open. The bright light poured into the hall. Seraphim blinked, adjusting her eyes to the grandeur of the atrium that awaited. They were high among the branches of the mother tree, silver tendrils weaving overhead, holding clusters of leaves and fruit that glistened in the morning sun. Seraphim paused at the edge of the atrium, her gaze falling on a semicircle of intricately carved seats facing a grand podium. The air buzzed with anticipation, laughter, and whispered conversation. Seated in the center of the arrangement, surrounded by an entourage of giggling girls, was Alaron. His relaxed posture and easy grin suggested he was enjoying their attention. His dark hair catching the light, the girls leaned in, their laughter ringing out as they hung on his every word. "He's certainly in his element," Seraphim muttered. Leander, standing beside her with an unimpressed expression, let out a dry chuckle. "Alaron Valerius, the charmer of Elysium, and the man has flirted with more maidens than the mother tree has branches." He gave her a sidelong glance, his lips quirks into a smile. "You know, if they gave awards for womanizing, he'd have an entire shelf." Seraphim arched a brow at him, but couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her. "Maybe he's just approachable?" Leander rolled his eyes. "Approachable, sure. Like a fox is approachable to a hen." He gestured toward the scene. "Don't tell me you're buying into his golden boy act." Her cheeks warmed slightly, though she shook her head. "I didn't say that." "Good," Leander quipped. "Because he's all sparkle and no substance." Still, her eyes drifted back to Alaron. She wondered if that was entirely true. Leander guided her toward the seats, and she sat beside Brolin, a young man with oval glasses and an anxious expression. "Brolin, do you know what's going on?" she asked. He adjusted his glasses. "Not much, only that my grandmother insisted I come," he replied, nodding subtly towards the front where Sylvana Greenwood, the High Elder, made her entrance. As Sylvana moved to the podium, her presence drew a hush over the atrium. Seraphim marveled at the elder, her elegance ageless, and her every step radiating wisdom as she glanced over the room. "Welcome, initiates. Please be seated and we will begin." The elder's voice filled the atrium, her tone warm yet commanding. "You've been called here because this year's trials are set against a unique backdrop. A total solar eclipse on the final day. An event that occurs only once in a century." A murmur rippled through the room. With a slight raise of her hand, Sylvana silenced them again. "This eclipse represents transformation and illumination, principles central to the trials. You will face 5 tasks: physical, mental, emotional, temptation, and finally, the selection. A hush fell over the atrium as her words sank in. Those who do not complete all five, will return to civilian life. The weight of her statement settled over them. Failure here meant relinquishing all hope of becoming an arborist or an angel guard, an outcome unthinkable for those who had trained their entire lives for these positions. Seraphim shifted uncomfortably, aware of how close, yet how fragile her dreams suddenly felt. The trials, Sylvana continued, are not merely challenges to conquer. They are meant to reveal your character, your potential to serve and protect. Not everyone is suited for this life, and there is no shame in a path apart from ours. But those of you who continue, be prepared to face not only your strengths, but your weaknesses. The tension in the room was thick as her words hung in the air, her gaze piercing each initiate with a look that saw through any facade. Seraphim's hand shot up. Yes, Seraphim Hightower, Sylvana acknowledged, surprising her with her memory of her name. Caught off guard, Seraphim stammered. I thought the Angel Guard had its own process. Leander leaned over, giving her a gentle nudge, but Sylvana only smiled, a knowing glint in her eyes. You're quite right, Seraphim. Normally, Angel Guards do have separate trials, but this year, the eclipse calls for unity, a shared path. You will all face the same challenges, but with your unique gifts and intentions guiding you. Only after the final selection will paths truly diverge. The room hummed with the weight of anticipation. Seraphim glanced around, seeing expressions of both hope and anxiety. Leander's gaze was fixed on Sylvana, his face unreadable, yet she sensed the same gravity mirrored in his posture. Sylvana continued, her voice unwavering. Now, we will sort each of you into your training specialties. Step forward as your names are called. She motioned for the first group of initiates to approach the podium. As they lined up, the room fell silent, save for a faint sound like sharp, discordant wind chimes ringing through the air. Seraphim blinked, feeling an odd sensation as her vision started to blur. She glanced around, hoping to see if anyone else noticed, but everyone else remained focused, their faces calm.